Good morning. How are you? It's Locked on Jazz's tip-off. I'm David Locke. There's no highlight and no music today because for some reason the band's not working. Hope you are well. Allergies are killing me. I don't know if anyone else is going through that. Holy smoke! So you'll probably hear a unfortunate sniffle or a eye rub or something else. It's not so good. And Benadryl to get me to get through the night last night. Now I'm half this morning. So anyway, here's what we have planned. The fourth candidate for the Jazz finalist job is now out there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Game 1 of the NBA Finals and update you on the latest news on all the coaching front. And the Jazz have big workouts coming today, tomorrow. Actually, I don't know if we're doing anything tomorrow or Sunday, so we'll see. But today there's a double workout coming up for the Jazz. And the Jabari Parker video is finally out. It had a technical problem yesterday. Couldn't get up. It went up late last night. It's on my YouTube page. I'll link to it on Locked on Jazz here in a moment. But let's start with last night's NBA Finals, and we'll film study on where Tim Duncan got his shots. If we have time, we'll look at Manu Ginobili's assists because they all tell the same story. But let's go back to what did we talk about beforehand in this series? Who could disrupt? Turns out, both these teams offensively are so great, very few people are disrupting. The Spurs end up shooting, insane numbers, and their fourth quarter was out of this world, and they just buried uncontested shot after uncontested shot. That's what jumps out more than anything in this game is how good some of their shooting numbers are on the new player tracking. Is that when the Spurs got the looks, they buried them. Miami generally did too, but I think the Spurs were at about 60% on uncontested shots last night, which is going to win you a lot of basketball games. There's a certain point where you're going to get those uncontested shots. They got them late, and they were money and buried them all the way. The final numbers on that, actually, just to give it to you to be exact, in the 110-95 win by uh, by the Spurs last night, a game that was obviously much closer, is the Spurs end up going 17 of 29 on uncontested shots. Frankly, they shot about the same percent on contested shots then because I think they were about 59% for the game. Tells you why these teams are great, so both offensively. Though we had a few surprises. We knew that Miami would try to force these turnovers against San Antonio, and San Antonio doesn't turn it over, and then San Antonio ended up turning it over. That was the surprise. Duncan got 10 looks, and the initial reaction on it is very much to what we talked about, that the Heat made Duncan shoot, whereas the Spurs try to make Bosh shoot. However, when we watch the film study coming up, you'll see that the Spurs did some interesting things, and Duncan got most of his action on secondary reverse weak side court action, which was a little different than what we anticipated coming into the game. But you do see, and this is where the Spurs were well equipped, 19 assists by Parker and Ginobili combined last night. That's coming off the way the Spurs action is. Actually, the Heat's defensive action is taking the ball out of the ball handler on the pick and roll and forcing that ball to be moved. And the Spurs are playing the game with such precision right now offensively that those assists are coming fast. Now, 30 assists, 22 turnovers. What's not being talked about, Miami is not a high assist team, but Miami's 16 assists, 16 turnovers. Well, playing Miami, San Antonio's going to turn the ball over. They're a high passing team, so they turn the ball over. But every player on the Spurs last night shot over 50% except for Diaw and Green, and Diaw was terrific. 6 assists for Diaw, most of those on weak side action, 11 for Manu, and 8 for Parker. They were able to get their best passers in position to make plays, make passes. The Heat was terrible. I do think it puts, it's unquestionable. It puts an asterisk around the performance because we're not talking about that. We're not talking about the game. We're talking about LeBron's cramps, rightfully so. The game's totally different when LeBron's not in there every way, from the defensive switches to who's able to go where to what it does. He's the best player in the world. You can say it's on LeBron. He cramped. Nobody else did. I think his body's so finely tuned that he's had a cramp problem over years, and that's why. Um, so I think that that's, um, I'm not putting it on LeBron. I think it's real. I mean, I think elite athletes run at a different level than everybody else. These are all elite athletes. His body might be a little tighter than everybody else's to some extent. So we'll see how it all plays out. But that was a big one. That's a huge win. Game one last year, San Antonio wins game one, loses the series, but game one, as we know well with the Utah Jazz, is a very important one to grab in a series. And this one, it's got a little bit of a asterisk to it, I guess, or question mark or discussion. All right, so the fourth candidate got mentioned, and frankly, he was right below our eyes the whole time, and we just didn't see it. But if we go back to the chart that I shared with you the other day, here are NBA successful coaches, and we had Lionel Hollins, George Karl, Alvin Gentry, Nate McMillan, and Alvin Gentry has been interviewed. And then we had those with the Spurs connections. We had Jim Boylan, Quinn Snyder, and I even had Brad Jones here. Previous head coaching experience, had it all sitting there. And, we didn't see it. Taylor Jenkins to an experience, Ken McDonald's not very experienced, Joe Prunty of the Brooklyn team, former Spurs assistant, is in this. But there it was, sitting right there, Brad Jones. And it really makes all the sense in the world. Here's Adrian Griffin, for those who missed it earlier. Mike Longobardi, Andy Greer, Bob Byer. Wild cards, Messina Blatt is being talked about as an assistant in Golden State or possibly Minnesota. Tony Bennett's someone who I generally think we were probably pretty interested in the process, but I think is enjoying his time at Virginia too much. And then there were just the other head coaches with D-League experience. And so here's where we were. And for those who didn't see it earlier, there's other names, but I think there were some names that probably weren't interested in us. We actually don't know that Lionel Hollins and George Karl were actually interested in us. I probably could take those off the list if I had that information. But here it is. And here's Brad Jones sitting here right before our eyes in this process. And the more I thought about it yesterday, it really makes a lot of sense. I think it's legit. And I think we should think about it for a minute. Let me kind of walk us through who Brad Jones is. Reviewing his resume last night, David Smith did a nice job on an old Salt City Hoops post that I went and re-grabbed. But if you go back through his resume and look at it a little bit, he's a small school NAIA coach to start his career. He plays at a place called Lambeth, which is a University of Memphis subsidiary. It's now been purchased by the University of Memphis, so if you kind of search Lambeth now, you don't find it. But so he's an assistant there, becomes a head coach at that NAIA school to open his career, and they have success. They go to the NAIA National Championships. He then becomes a pro scout for the Utah Jazz. From there, probably connected to the fact that his uncle is Jerry Sloan at that point. His wife actually becomes a Division I head coach in Louisiana. So I think those, it looked to me as though those things are connected, that he's in Jackson, Tennessee at Lambeth from 95 to 2001, and his wife takes the job in 2001. He becomes a pro scout. While he's at Lambeth, it might be, okay, this is a small school thing, but just twice named conference coach of the year, pair of conference championships. You just kind of, okay, master's degree, so he's well educated at Memphis after finishing up in Lambeth. He then becomes, in 2007, the D-League head coach in Orem. His first year, they're 24-26. His second year, they're 32-18. They go to the D-League Finals. And you suddenly see, wow, that's pretty impressive. And the next year, they're 28-22. Very good as well. Second straight playoff experience. So there you see a nice growth pattern. You see a coach who took a team and it improved each of the next two times out. And you go back and look at his Lambeth teams. They did the same thing. 2000, remember the Flash became a little bit of a mess under Brant Anderson at this point, and probably were the whole time, to his credit, of finding a way to get this to work. He then goes, and the Spurs hire him as to follow Quinn Snyder as the D-League head coach there, as Quinn begins his run of four cities. Quinn was the Austin Toros coach, then went to Philadelphia, the Lakers, CSKA Moscow, and Atlanta in the last 4 years. Jones becomes the 2-year D-League head coach there, and is wins the D-League championship in 2012. So his team gets better. So we now have 3 cases of him coaching. All 3 cases of his team gets better. All 3 times he coaches, his team gets to the championship level. Pretty good. So I think that just, here, I think the one thing we're probably missing on Brad Jones, because we think of him as an assistant coach for the Jazz, and frankly, he just looks like he's just a guy, is he's a professional coach. He's a professional coach that's won. Now you start to look at him, okay, a little bit more deeply and say, wait a sec, so he's got a connection to Sloan and a connection to Popovich. I go back to a tweet I sent out a few weeks ago. The last 2 systematic offenses that ran at an incredibly high level were Sloan's 90s teams and Popovich's teams now. Well, this guy's been associated with both of them. Okay? The only blip, frankly, on his resume is the 2 years he spent with the Jazz in the last 2 years when they didn't do a lot of winning. But those are 2 years in which he gets exposed to the NBA, and you probably would hope that he's taken those 2 years to adjust some of the coaching stuff that he's done in Orem and in Austin and in Jackson, Tennessee with Lambeth. So the resume as a coach, and particularly when you go back and look at our little sheet, he's got a Spurs connection, he's got a Jazz connection, he's got a head coaching experience. It's pretty legit. Then I begin, all right, well, so he didn't play, and 9 of the 16 playoff coaches didn't play. The final 2 playoff coaches, 3 of the final 4 didn't play. All right, let's move on. Is his association with the organization the last 2 years a positive or a negative for Brad Jones? I think it's positive. He was player development head coach, or player development coach the first year, so he's working with Alec, Ennis, Gordon, Derek directly. That's his job. If you remember Derek's free throw revival, Brad's behind that with his work there. He's the one working the iPad on the bench with Trey, Gordon, and those guys. He's got that connection. He gets hired tomorrow. He starts with a relationship with these players and probably starts at the 50-yard line. Now you're hoping this next coach is going to be with us for 4 or 5 years, so maybe this is only a short-term advantage and not that big a deal. But is it a positive or negative that he's been on the staff the last 2 years? I'd say it's a positive. He knows that Derek needs to run a little harder. He knows Gordon's unique personality that makes him difficult to coach. He knows where Trey struggled and where Trey didn't in some of the inner workings of Trey last year. He knows the progress that Alec has taken, where they put him on the floor, what worked, what didn't. It's a pretty good resume. In fact, I don't want to get into picking who I prefer. I mean, I know Brad from working with him this year. And I probably didn't realize during the year how good his resume was. I didn't realize he'd won everywhere he'd ever been. Just a guy. He's just a normal, great guy. He's loyal to Utah. Does that matter to us? Does that matter to us that this guy, if he took this job, this would be the job he'd want? If he got this job, he's not looking at the Laker job if the Laker job opens. He's not looking at the Knicks job if the Knicks job opens. He's here. He's got connections here. He wants to be here. He actually moved his son out here this year. What's our thought? How does that play into this? I'm pretty intrigued by it. I don't really like the compare and contrast game because I'm not sitting in the interviews, and so I don't know. But just resumes. Okay, Alvin Gentry's got the coaching record. He's a little below 500. He's had about 10 years of head coaching experience. I mean, if the head coaching experience really turns out to be important, that's it. He evolved well in Phoenix. Okay, that's a superior to resume of experience to Brad. Brad Jones, Quinn Snyder. Quinn's got some flash. He's a better looking dude. Sorry, Brad. I find Quinn much more attractive than you. But who's got a better resume? Brad's coached a college NAIA team. Quinn's coached a Missouri team. Does that matter that Missouri's bigger deal? Got NCAA violations? Okay. Both have D League experience. They both coached the same D League. Both went to the playoffs. Brad actually won a championship with the Toros. Both worked under Dennis. Dennis knows. Dennis worked with both of them during that time period. I don't know that. I could make an argument either way. I could make an argument for Brad that 5 years of D League coaching, every single one of his programs have improved. Quinn can't say that because of Missouri. That he's had more exposure than Quinn has with the 5 years of professional basketball as a head coach, and then a year on the bench to kind of where Quinn is in a similar situation with kind of the way he's bounced around the last few years. Quinn's got the Krzyzewski tie that Brad doesn't have. Does that matter? I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a nice thing on your resume, and then when you look at it in regards to NBA, I think it's irrelevant. I could also argue that Quinn's is, Missouri's a bigger program, higher pressure, had that experience, dealt with the media at a higher level, has that preparation level that Brad doesn't have. Pretty interesting two candidates right there. That's my vibe. I think Alvin's going to get Cleveland. I think he's in Cleveland this weekend for I believe one of the two finalists for Cleveland from what I read somewhere. Adrian Griffin, I think, is a very impressive coach coming. And if we hire Adrian Griffin, I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, I'm ecstatic. Because for Adrian Griffin to get through this interview process and become the guy when his resume is the exact same as the previous head coach that didn't work or that the organization deemed wasn't the right guy for the future. It's pretty impressive, right? I think Adrian Griffin starts behind the eight ball. It's interesting. You look at these coaches, and if you think about it from a football field analogy, I would say that Alvin Gentry, because he has head coaching experience, started with the ball in opponent's territory to get the touchdown. Quinn Snyder, because of his Duke tie and his flash and all that kind of stuff, I think probably started about the 50-yard line in the interview process. Adrian Griffin, former player, moves him up to about the 30, but the fact that he was has the exact same resume as Tyron Coleman, starts him about the 25. Brad Jones, I actually think, just because we almost knew him too well, he was like just kind of the guy, you kind of just didn't notice him. He did his job as an assistant. He stayed below the radar. He didn't become flamboyant. They had instituted the rule where assistants couldn't talk. Or Dennis, I don't know who did, instituted the rule that assistants couldn't talk, so he didn't talk. He just stayed behind the scenes. He probably kind of started almost at the goal. He's probably got the longest way to go, right? Like once he got going, hopefully he had the momentum to be able to show that he wasn't hurt by being with the organization. But that's kind of where I feel everybody's starting in this process. Is I think Adrian Griffin's probably got as tough a run as anyone because of the fact that his resume is the exact same as Tyrone's. So it's an interesting one. Quinn, Brad. Lambeth, Duke. It's kind of, right? The National High School Player of the Year, McDonald's All-American, going to Duke with his JD MBA, or the Lambeth NAIA guy from the South who's just a nice, good old guy who's got his master's degree from Memphis instead of Duke. Which is it? None of that had anything to do with basketball, but which is it? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? I don't know when we find out. I don't know if it's them. Who knows? There's not a 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th candidate. And I will tell you the one thing is if they're not happy, I think they would reset the process and keep it going. There is no urgency. I got to tell a funny story. This is probably the wrong audience to tell this funny story. So I was speaking to a group of Jazz fans the other day down at the arena. And one of the fans was kind of, well, we should have a date by which we're getting this done. And I said, well, the last people who had a deadline that they stuck to chose Sarah Palin. And I had thought when I said that even in all Republican Utah, that a Sarah Palin joke was still all right. I had thought that I could get away with a Sarah Palin joke, that I thought those were universally funny to anyone at any point. Not a single laugh in the entire room. So then I have to sit there and explain that the Republican National Committee had decided that they were announcing the VP 2 days after Obama's speech in Denver in Vesco Field because they wanted to quell the momentum that he was getting out of that speech, and they had decided that their decision date for a VP and announcement was going to be on this day because it's the right day for PR and for marketing for polls to get it done. And then when they went through the vetting process of their other VPs, a bunch of them fell off the map, and the whole Joe Lieberman thing happened. And next thing you know, they didn't have a candidate, and so they just like grabbed Sarah Palin without doing a heck of a lot of research on her, didn't vet her well enough, obviously, and ended up with Sarah Palin as their vice president. And I thought that universally, unquestionably, everyone thought that that was a mistake. And it didn't work very well. I was wrong. Even in Utah, or moreover, in Utah, you can't even make a Sarah Palin joke. Who was I to know? Or how was I to know? So yes, so I learned that. So I did not. I tried one more and I got nothing out of any of it. All right, let's see what else do I got here. So that's kind of I don't know. I'm curious to hear if you guys want to hold. Somebody wants to put up a post on the Lockdown Sports Google Plus community and throw some thoughts around there on what I just outlined in the coaches and where you'd go and what you would do. I'd be pretty curious um, to see how it's done and what's taking place on that. But the more I think I was probably victimized a little bit on the Brad Jones front. I mean, I had him sitting here on our sheet, right? And I know him, and I spent a year with him, last 2 years with him, and um, didn't probably take the time to realize how good his resume was. All right. Uh, Other news: Flip Saunders takes Minnesota. Pretty interesting. Calipari must have been the guy in LA because he just got a big, huge new contract without an out. But John Calipari must have been the guy the Lakers wanted. I think there was something to that. All right, let's go to questions. There's a bunch today, so let's see if we can go grab them. From Jason Lamb. Every playoff team but Memphis has outside shooting. This team doesn't. Who do you think they should acquire? I think Webster was. Washington wants to resign. Ariza, Gortat, younger guys, and Webster, Morrow, Hamilton, Vetson, Garcia, Granger, or RJ. Charlotte didn't have great outside shooting either. That's not to say that that's not there. No, you got to shoot in this league, right? I mean, we were one of the worst teams in the league on uncontested jumpers all year. Um, all those guys are legit. I haven't looked at the free agent market at all yet. Again, I think we're into a tricky circumstance. I'll run through it again. First person on the chat room, we got a lot of people live. First person in the chat room, give me a player we're drafting. Just give me. I need one name. First person writes it up in the chat room who we're drafting so I can continue this. So we have Trey, we have Alec, we have Gordon, we have Ennis, and we have Derek. Okay, that's 5. We have Rudy as our next backup. Not one person in the chat room decided to play along. All right, Josh Perry, thank you very much. Just made the pick for the Utah Jazz. So we then add Marcus Smart. Okay, so we now have Smart, Burke, and Burks, Hayward, Favors, Cantor, Gobert, our 23rd pick, who, there's that Latvian kid that's being talked about that Oklahoma City supposedly has promised at 21. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for us to do something like that. Promise some kid at 23 that we then put in Europe for a few years and wait for him to develop. Because I'm not sure that 23rd pick is, it's an 8th young guy on our roster, right? I haven't counted Jeremy Evans yet in the process. You can decide where you feel he fits in as the 9th guy on the process. And then you add 2 or 3 vets. Then you go acquire Jeremy Lin for another first-round draft pick or something, or you do something with your cap room, or you sign vets, and there's your roster. It's hard to get all. There's only 48 minutes a night, and there's a lot of young players on this roster. So I don't know who you hire or how you deal with free agency. We're going to be in this bind for a little while until we move some of these guys. Paul Johansson, my wife and I are going to Park City this evening. Where is your favorite place to eat? Purple Sage or High West, but High West is so crowded it's hard to get in. Purple Sage, Main Street. That would be my suggestion. Check the Park Record newspaper. They often have 2-for-1 coupons for numerous places in Park City in the summer. So check the park, grab the Park Record before you go into a restaurant. See whether or not maybe you can grab that. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. I'll look for you. From Billy Murphy, I know you're probably not there yet. Can you tell everybody who's? Can you tell why everybody's so high on Noah Vonleh? Because there are a lot of mock drafts that have us taking us. I am not there yet, Billy. I'm not ready to. I have not. I just downloaded some Indiana games. I just finished my Jabari Parker video. It's up on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to do Marcus Smart next, and then Noah Vonleh after that. So, um, people think he's Chris Bosh, but I have not watched enough to know if that's true. From Matt. Has the organization decided yet if it's going to make the playoffs next year? And if not, what does that depend on? The draft, free agency, and also the chances that they make a splash in free agency. I think Dennis has been pretty clear. We're in the midst of a process. We're not going to skip steps. When some of that next step happens is what's not clear. And one of that steps is moving out of asset accumulation and into team building. But I do not think we'll make the playoffs next year. I think we're still a few years away from that. I think there's a process going on. We're incredibly young, older teams. Miami's actually older than San Antonio. Older teams win. We're not going to be that older team. And I think that there's I don't think we're making the playoffs this year, and I think it's part of a growing process. Very few teams have gone from 25 wins to the playoffs. You got to walk your way up that. That's where I think you got those 9 guys in your roster. And until you can move two or three of those 9 guys for some major pillar piece, you're going to stay in this mode for a little while. And from Jad X, how big a step back do the Jazz take if for some reason they don't re-sign Gordon Hayward? Not good. You don't want to overpay him too much because I think there's limitations on who he can be as a player and who he is in this league. But you don't want to lose an asset for nothing along the way, so it would not be good. That is tip-off today. Interested to hear your thoughts. Should be a good weekend. Enjoy yourselves, everybody, and we'll talk with you on Monday. We'll see when the Jazz end up with a head coach here, and this process could be soon. See ya.